Welcome to Inside the SCCA, presented by RacingWire.com. On this episode, the success of a regional race series. Welcome to Inside the SCCA, presented by RacingWire.com. I'm Brian Bielanski. This week we're doing something different. We're talking about a particular race series, a quite successful one, and we've not done this before on the show, so I'm really excited about that. Joining me tonight from the Washington, D.C. region of the SCCA, got two guys who, I don't know if they remember me, but I hung out at the Washington, D.C. region a little while ago, back when I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia for a while, and up in Long Island. I came and played with you guys and had some fun at Summit Point, and you guys are here with me today. Welcome. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Doing really good. I apologize to everybody for the little bit of delay. We were joking before the show, but after 300 episodes, I think I found every problem I could ever come up with. Well, guess what, folks? I found a new one tonight, and it was operator error on this one. I'll fall on my sword. Paul, Anderson, Greg McDermott. We start every show the same way, so we're going to start this show the same way as well. You're each going to get a chance to answer the question, and it's pretty simple. How did you get started in this crazy sport that we love? And which one of you would do paper, rock, scissors? Do you decide who gets to go first? How are we going to do it?
I vote for Greg.
All right.
Sure. I'm the newbie here, relatively, so... how I got started with SCCA. I've been a member of the WDCR, Washington, D.C. region of SCCA since 2002.
Okay.
And basically in that year, the American Le Mans Series had a race in the streets of Washington, D.C.
Yep, I was there.
I attended as a spectator, saw these folks and gentlemen and ladies out on the corners dressed in white, and said, wow, I'd like to know how to do that.
Yep.
So after the race was done, I went back home. I found the SCCA website. It pointed me to the correct contacts in the Washington, D.C. region. I contacted the flag chief at the time, a gentleman named Stan Wantland, and said, hey, I'm interested in doing what you all do. How do I get involved? That
awesome.
Would have been August of 2020 or 2002. And he said, well, we have our big event of the year coming up on Labor Day weekend. Come on out. We'll take care of the rest. And so I showed up, started as a flagger, and have been involved ever since.
Did you do anything in the car world before that day, or were you just an enthusiast?
I was an enthusiast. I've always been a race fan,
okay.
But, up until that point, I kind of thought the Sports Car Club of America was for people who owned sports cars.
Yes.
I was not a sports car owner, so I was pleasantly surprised to find out, there are things I can do in the club and, make myself useful and have fun doing it. I'd always been a race fan, but had never been involved in any sort of organization like this before.
So that race weekend was at around RFK Stadium, back when that was a thing. And myself and TJ Mullich were flagging at the hairpin for that weekend. Okay. Yeah. And it was hot and sweaty and humid,
dreadfully hot
and disgusting. But we had a blast. It was absolutely a blast. All right, Paul, you're up next. How did you get started in this crazy sport?
Oh, I started a little bit earlier than that. I was always a car enthusiast, but I was really more into drag racing, kind of stuff. And I had a friend of mine who wanted me to come out and see the road races at Marlboro, which doesn't exist anymore. And I said, nah, I don't want to see those stupid little 4-cylinder cars. I want to see the really powerful cars. And he leaned on me and poured a couple beers down my throat and talked me into it. I came out. I said, gee, that looks like kind of fun driving around those corners and everything. So I started getting interested in that, and I went to some races, and I attended one of the Sebring 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I think it was 1967, I joined SCCA. And I would go to the races and go to the membership meetings, and that was about my involvement. And then in beginning of 69, I was at one of the membership meetings, and our flag marshal at the time, Dave Melanie, stood up and he said, we're looking for new people to come out and help. And I said, no, what the heck, I'll sign up for it. So I did, and I started at Marlboro and came out on Sunday. And those days I was working in retailing, so I couldn't do anything on Saturday. I was working for real on Saturday.
Right.
And got involved in it, and been there ever since.
Right. So, Greg, you're right. You are the newbie on the panel. Paul's got about a 20-year head start on me, and I've got about a 20-year head start on you. So we run the gamut here of our involvement with the club. So when I was looking for episodes, or not even looking, my good friend Greg Ginsburg, who you all know, he has been involved with Washington D.C. region for as long as I can remember, and he and I met way back in the day, and we now do the Super Tour broadcast together. And he said, you really need to do a podcast about the Mars series. I'm like, Mars series? Why would I do a podcast about a series? And I started thinking about it. And it's hard to run a long-standing series here in the SCCA. And you guys have done it since the middle to late 1970s. And if there's not a better success story in that regard, I'm like, we found it here. So Greg started the discussion, and I counted them. I didn't count them. The Google counted them for me. 47 emails later. we are here tonight, and this was definitely a team effort. A lot of folks in the region helped gather information so that you guys know all the history on how we got to today. And I want to thank a whole bunch of folks who I don't have their names in front of me, but they're all on that 47 email chain that we went through here. So let's go back. The Summit Point opened in what, 67 or 68?
69.
69, okay.
69. That was the first race ever. I think it was either September or October 69.
And you guys, when I say you guys, I'm referring to the Washington D.C. region. Was the Washington D.C. region one of the original, customers at Summit Point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think we either had the first race or the second race there. There may have been a motorcycle group that had an event before we did, but right. I'm not sure about that.
Okay. So right from the start, y'all are doing stuff at Summit Point. For those folks who are not from the Middle Atlantic, explain to people where Summit Point is and where it is in relation to Washington, D.C.
Summit Point is in eastern West Virginia, and it's about halfway between Winchester, Virginia, and Frederick, Maryland, which are the two closest large communities.
Right.
It's about a 2-hour drive, maybe, depending on what part of the region you're in, from Washington, D.C. itself. And it still is, and back then it very much was out in the boonies.
Right. Yeah, I remember I first started going there. Let's see, I moved to New York in '99, so I'm guessing my first time to Summit Point was the 2000 driver school. I had the itch, that itch that we get. We're all winter long. We're sitting at home and wanting to go to the racetrack. And I think the first thing in the Northeast Division that year was the driver school. And I'm like, I'm going to the driver school. And I got a hold of Stan and Shirley and I met them many years earlier at the runoffs. And I said, I'd like to come play. And like, yeah, come on now, we'd love to have you. So I went down. That was my first trip and my first experience doing things with the Washington, D.C. region, well into the lifespan of what was now the Mars Series. So you started in 69. Things are going swimmingly well, I'm guessing. You guys are doing your races throughout the years. And then we get to 1977. Or maybe it's 76 when you finally got the news. And the news...
It was 75.
Okay.
When the then owners of Summit Point, they were the second owners, and we had been racing there as with non-spectator events up to that point. And they came to the region probably, I don't remember the date, halfway to 2/3 of the way through 75, and said, oh, by the way, the track rental is going up next year. And it was going up so that if we were to maintain the finances the way we always did, we would have to triple the entry fees.
Wow.
And obviously that was not a good scene. So our board of directors got together and said, well, the new contract says that we can now have spectators.
Okay.
And if we want to get spectators, then we have to promote the races because the track owners won't.
Got it.
So our new contract specified that if that of all the spectator income that came in, the track got 10% and we got the rest.
Okay. All right.
So our board of directors created the public relations committee to promote racing.
Yeah.
Which was very interesting. So I was one of the co-chairs of that original committee.
Okay.
And we quickly found out very quickly that you cannot promote regional racing.
Why is that?
Especially when it's 2 hours away from your closest population center out in the boonies somewhere.
Right. Well, it's 2 hours out in the boonies now. And back then, I mean, because there was Sterling, Virginia, a thing at that point in time, or was because it seems
Sterling was there, but it was just getting built up.
Yeah, okay.
And the roads, and once you got out of Maryland, the roads were single lane rather than dual lane roads. So back then, it was probably from the D.C. area, which is where I lived, probably 2.5 hour drive.
Sure.
And that's if you weren't towing.
Right.
That's if you were just driving there.
And for people inside the Beltway, Sterling, Virginia must have felt like forever away, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what was... Go ahead, Greg.
I live on essentially on the south side of the Beltway now, and it can take me anywhere from 80 minutes to, I mean, of course, this is the D.C. area.
Right.
So, 80 minutes if there's no traffic, 2.5 hours if there is. So
when is there no traffic, Greg?
Between 2 and 4 in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can't remember ever going through D.C. for when it was that long. It was probably a shorter drive from Charlottesville to Summit Point than it was to from D.C. to Summit Point. So, so you said you couldn't promote a regional race. Why was that? Do you think?
Well, the races were at Summit Point in West Bygod, Virginia. And we were the Washington, D.C. region with the Washington, D.C. championship.
Right.
So it was very difficult to promote that. So our PR committee got together and we said, well, we've got to change this. So we've got to figure out some way that we can make the races promotable. And after a lot of discussion, and I want to do a shout out real quick so I don't forget them. The original members of that PR committee, which had a lot to do with what happened, was Conrad Poniatowski, who was the co-chair with me, Jamie Wagner, J.C. McCreary, Bob Johnson, Dick Crawford, John Baker, Jim Stanton, Don Blatchley, Bill Cheney, and Leonard Cohen. And a couple of those folks are now deceased. And I think I'm the only one that's still active in SCCA at this point.
Awesome.
But we looked at it and we said, we have to come up with something which is promotable that we can sell tickets to.
Sure.
And we said, well, we have to make it something that's got a little pizzazz. So we came, and I don't remember who came up with the name because we kicked around probably 50 names.
Right.
And we came up with the Mars series. And we modified the race program a little bit. So when we had the regular regional races, but every weekend we had a feature race which was a minimum of a 25 lap or 50-mile race, which was our feature. And that's what we promoted.
Yeah.
And we did advertising for that. We made up posters and had posters all around town and around Baltimore. And we promoted the feature race as the Mars race.
And how long did it take for that to catch on? Is it a pretty quick success, or was it a little rough going at the start?
It started slowly in the spring, but you have to remember, not only do we have the Mars series, we also had 2 nationals at that time at Summit Point.
Right.
And the nationals, of course, were a little bit easier to promote. But we had great success with the promotion of the first national and the second national. And we had press days, we had TV stations out taking video. We gave reporters rides around the track and race cars. We did the whole 9 yards to promote it. And then we also did the posters and the promotion for the Mars races, because we couldn't do it on the income just from 2 nationals.
Right. Right. So the jump in price, let's talk about that for a second. Let's just back up just a tiny bit. In the emails that were going around, the new number that you were going to need to cover the series for the season, for the whole year, and what started all of this was that Summit Point was going to ask for $100,000 for the season, right?
Right.
And
doesn't sound like much these days.
It does not, because I know for a fact that when you go to any racetrack now, if you get a weekend for less than $25,000 to $50,000, it's because you've picked a really horrible weekend. So how much we want to put it in perspective. Before that, how many races could you do? How many races would you, how do we put that into how much they raise the prices on you?
Greg, you want to take that?
Well, I mean, is Brian asking that jump to 100,000? What did that jump from?
Right. Because you were obviously getting a lot less than that before that.
Some events we were paying less than $10,000 an event.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, that's a good price jump, isn't it? And that's for how many races now will you try to get for that $9,000 or for that $100,000?
Well, it was 9 events: 2 driver schools, 2 nationals, and 5 regionals.
Got it. So that's a lot of tickets you got to sell, but some of that's offset by entry fees, I'm guessing, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So it was really impressive. I was able to get some stuff sent to me, and let me put some video up here from what was sent out to us. So I've got the Straight Pipe is the DC region newsletter. And so you've got some pictures here of how it was promoted. There's that Mars logo. And some of the pictures don't translate well when you put them on a computer 25, 30 years later. But this was from the promotional. The other thing I saw that you guys did that was really interesting is you put together a race program. I'm guessing you sold that program.
Yes, we had a glossy program for the 2 nationals, and we had a regular paper program that we had for the Mars.
So one of the things when I was leafing through the program, which I thought was brilliant, was that it basically, you could hand that program to somebody who'd never been to a race, and it would explain to them what they were looking at. It taught them how to watch a race on a road course, where to stand to watch a race, what the flags meant, what the people in white were doing, the schedule, and it was really a really awesome piece of work, because I'm guessing that a lot of people who showed up at the races had never been to a race before, right?
Correct. And the members of the PR committee that I mentioned before wrote all of those articles to put in there.
It had a questionnaire where you could gather addresses, which was great because then you could send them information about the next event. It was just a really well thought out piece of work there, and I'm sure that helped you keep people coming back, right?
Yeah. And then the growth of the series, we ran like that, I think it was for 2 years. And then we said, well, we're called the Mid-Atlantic Road Racing Series, so we should do something more in the region. And we talked to adjoining regions who had racetracks, and we had expanded the series to Pocono and Watkins Glen and Nelson Ledges. And they had races. And then we charged those regions $10 per car if they were registered to run for Mars Series points.
Okay.
So we had another source of income there.
Very good. Very good. And how interested were those regions into getting and being part of that Mars Series at the time?
Well, when they saw how many entries we were getting for Mars, they were anxious to have us come.
Sure. And I guess when you expand it to those areas of the division, and if it's a big championship, that would be more impetus for people up at Watkins Glen or up in the Poconos to make the tow down to Summit for your races, right?
Well, absolutely. And the one thing I didn't mention, I overlooked, the feature races we had all had cash purses.
Oh, interesting. So was that, how did you generate the purses? Was there a sponsor for those?
The same way that we did everything else, through spectator sales.
Okay. When you came up with the idea, did you think it was going to work?
We didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
But the bottom line was either that or we were going to be out of the racing business and the track was going to maybe close.
Yeah.
Because back in those days, us and the motorcycles were pretty much the only game in town.
Sure. That's pretty crazy. So real quick, we've got a bunch of people here in the chat. And let me see. Mike Collins is here, giving me a hard time for starting late. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Carl Johnson's here. J.D. King, Steve Moeller. Thank you all for being here. If you have questions for the guys here, please put them in the chat, and I will be sure to ask them to both Paul and Greg. Also, if you're here and you're enjoying this, hit the like button. And subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so that every time there's a new episode that we will make sure that you get alerted to it. So what, Greg, when did you start getting involved with the program?
So, as I mentioned, I started as a member in 2002.
Okay.
Just a few years after that, I kind of joined the flag chief staff as an assistant flag chief. Then I served around 3 years as flag chief. Stepped back into a non-administrative role for a few years.
Okay.
And in 2014, Paul, who was serving as regional executive at the time, approached me about stepping into the road racing program director position.
Okay.
So I actually joined as an assistant program director in 2014 to train into the position, served as the program director from 15, 16, 17, and 18. And then I again stepped back, transitioned back to being a flag chief for a while.
Sure.
And then stepped back into the program director role in 2023. So I'm in my second year of my second stint as the road racing program director. And then part of that role also means I am the Mars Series administrator.
Got it. So when you got involved, even just as in the club, this series had already been tooling along for 30 years.
Yes.
Did you know any of this history, or is this something that, I mean, or have you basically learned it through this process that we've been putting together to get to this show?
Well, I've definitely learned it through this process. One thing about joining the Flag Corps when I did, it was full of, let's just say, seasoned veterans who had been around since the late 60s, early 70s. So they had been involved all along. Anyone who knows flaggers knows that they are storytellers.
No.
So there's lots of verbal history and verbal lore that was communicated. But yeah, as far as being aware of the well-documented history and the history that is in these newsletters and it's definitely, I wasn't aware of all of that at the time. And I just had a vague recollection or vague idea of those kind of early days in the 70s and then also in the 80s when we were getting tons of spectators and that was an area of profit for the region that allowed us to grow the series and do the things that we needed to do.
On a side note, if you are part of a region that had a newsletter over the years and you haven't done this yet, go through the process of getting as many of those newsletters and digitizing them and making an archive, because I don't know who dug the newsletters up for this little project that happened. I think they came from a couple different sources, and I know Gabrielle is one of the folks who helped with that, so we want to thank her.
And she's a DC region historian.
Okay, so if you don't have a historian, if you do, hopefully they've done all this work already. But go out there and make sure you collect as many of those as you can if there's an archive, because this has been really fun for me. I just kind of sat in the wings and watched you all put all the information together. But it was really kind of spectacular to see. When we've been putting this together for about a month, maybe 6 weeks ago is when we kind of started talking about this. And it's been really fun to see all of that history. I'm a history buff to begin with. I went to college as a history major, so these kinds of episodes are really cool for me. Greg, what is this system? How much of that original format, with the 2 weekends and having a feature race on Sunday, how much of that format do you guys stick with today in how the series is run?
That was one of the things that was really kind of interesting to me to see, and to realize that kind of what we were doing back then, we've never really deviated too far from that format. Right now, the Mars Series format is really very similar to what it was then. On a standard 2-day race weekend, we have 8 race groups. Every group gets a Saturday morning qualifying, then a Saturday afternoon heat race, and then a longer feature race on Sunday. And although we've kind of done variations on that theme across the 48 years, I guess, we've been in existence, that's kind of the format we always seem to keep coming back to. It seems to be what best suits the racers' desires and needs.
I've got some video. Hold on one second, Paul. I just started. You guys actually live stream your races like we do out here in Cal Club, and similar to what we do for the Super Tours. Greg and Brian Donati are the 2 top-notch guys running that program for you guys. And Greg sent me some highlights from, I don't remember which Mars race. I think this might have been the last one, but so I'm showing some video of today's racing at Summit Point. So. Paul, is it make you feel good that what you started in 77 is essentially what you're still doing now in 2024?
Absolutely. The program has changed a little bit over the years. In the mid-'80s, the owners of the track sold the track to Bill Scott and Tom Milner.
Yep.
And when they saw how much money we were making, they decided they wanted to do the promotion, so they took it back. And that's when we stopped doing the promoting and when we stopped having the paid feature races.
Okay.
And we just had a regular regional race, but it was still the Mars Series, and we were at several tracks besides Summit Point. When VIR reopened after being closed for a number of years, that was added as one of the Mars destinations.
How important is it, and you guys can both answer this question, to have a partnership type relationship with the facilities you race at, rather than, because it feels like at Summit Point and it's some of the tracks I go to, there's this relationship where the region and the track are kind of, I mean, it's a partnership. And in other places I go to, the region and the region is a customer, and I feel like the partnership situation, which is what it feels like at Summit Point, is really important to the success of programs like this.
That was one of the things that really helped us to be able to be as successful as we were.
And does that continue today?
I'll jump in here, Paul. I think what Paul just said can't be really undersold. That partnership really allowed the series to gain its footing and continue for the greatest part of its current 48 years. Obviously, it was about a decade ago when Bill Scott passed away, and eventually the Summit Point passed out of the family's hands. And I think that's one of the things that has been hardest for some of the folks that have been around a long time to get used to. Summit Point now, we still have a great relationship with them, but it is definitely a business. It is in corporate hands, and it needs to be run like a business for them to justify their existence.
Sure.
And so there have definitely been some changes. And, some of those changes, I would say the vast majority of those changes have been improvements, especially when you look at the track itself and the racing surface and the safety upgrades and that sort of thing. All tremendous improvements that have happened. But there are obviously folks that still yearn for those days when it was more of a family affair.
Yeah.
But we all have to adapt and move on if we're going to continue to remain in the racing business. And, for the track to remain in business and for us to maintain a successful series, that adaptation is key.
Paul, you mentioned something earlier, and I kind of let it go, but I want to go back to it for a second. When this was first hatched, it sounds as though the success of this Mars series was as important for the Washington, D.C. region as it was for Summit Point, because you mentioned that it was like if this didn't work, the track might have actually closed down.
It would have almost certainly closed down if it hadn't worked out. As I said, back in those days where we didn't have, like NASA and the other groups like we have today. So there weren't as many potential users of the track.
Right.
Maybe Porsche Club and one or two others, and the motorcycles, which used to be a regular, and go-karts and us. And that was about it. So yeah.
And now there's a secondary track also. There
were actually 3 tracks on the premises now. Well, actually 4 if you count the Washington circuit, which they use for solo right now.
Okay. So yeah, a lot of things have happened out there over the last 50 years, haven't they?
Yeah. Most of that happened under the watch of Bill Scott.
Right.
Bill Scott was a great partner with the region, and he built that track, and he showed the world how to make a racetrack pay for itself.
Yeah, Bill was an absolute legend in that region and actually all around the country. If you were involved with SCCA, the name Bill Scott's one you should know. And I believe did he just get named to the SCCA Hall of Fame last year or the year before?
I think it was last year.
Yeah. I'm part of the Hall of Fame selection committee, although I was part of the legacy committee. So Bill was in the more current committee. But yeah, definitely a lot of people in the club have amateur racing careers to thank for what he's done at Summit Point. So also pretty cool. Apparently, Greg reminds us in the chat, I guess he and Bob Crawford started talking about the idea to do this broadcast about 6 months ago, and back in April, and Greg harassed me for for the whole summer until I had some time to do it. So good stuff. All right, before we go on and talk a little bit more about the Mars Series today, let me take a second here, and I want to thank all of the people that helped me make this happen. If you look up in the corner here, I guess it would be up there. You'll see the logos of the people who help sponsor the show. And, of course, Inside the SCCA, presented by RacingWire.com, our new presenting sponsor. They joined us about a month ago. Can't thank them enough. They run a great racing school out here at both Buttonwillow and at Willow Springs. And they have the school's so good that people come from all across the country to go be part of it. And just really good people out there, and I couldn't be happier to have them be part of the show here as well. Also want to thank Racekeeper. They are the official in-car camera of Inside the SCCA. You will find their in-car camera footage. I'm taking the camera with me to the Solo Nationals next weekend, and we'll get a lot of video there. And anytime we do something, we did a whole great podcast on the new Club Spec cars. Took the camera with me to Akron to drive the Mustang, the Goodyear put together. All that video came from the Racekeeper, so check them out. And then, of course, Solo Performance Specialties. They are very timely with Solo Nationals coming up this coming weekend. They're at all or most of the national tours. And, of course, even if you don't get to one of those, you can go to their website and order some stuff there. They've got some really great stuff as well. And then finally, Ray Esports is the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. We love racing with Ray and his people there, Stevie Ray. And it's a great sim racing series because most of the drivers, of course, are racers and SCCA racers. So we treat the racing more like there's the consequences of what you would do on the regular racetrack, and there's not as much bumping and pushing and shoving when we do the Ray Esports events. So check them out. All of the information for all of these folks are in the show notes. Check them out. Click the links. Tell them I sent you. So, all right. Back to the show now, and we've got Paul Anderson, Greg McDermott here from Washington, D.C. region, talking about the Mars Series. Started in 1977. 48 years later, it is still running, and it is. Is there any other regional that you know of? Any other regional series that has been around as long as Mars?
Not to my knowledge.
I'm not aware of any that have been around for as long as we have.
Yeah, it's I can't either, and I've raced all over the country, and there's some good series out there, but I just can't think of one that's started in '77 and still running today. It's run continuously since '77, right? There's been no gaps.
No gaps whatsoever.
That is so cool, so cool. Greg, what's it like today? If I'm coming to Washington D.C. or if I'm in the Northeast and in the Mid Atlantic and I want to come racing the Mars Series, tell us what the series looks like today.
So the series today, I feel like we're still being successful in drawing the competitors. One of the main differences between, now and even just 20 years ago when I started, a little over 20 years ago, there is a lot more competition for the racer's dollar. Summit Point now where we race, the circuit that we race on, it is booked every day of the year from the beginning of March, or every weekend of the year from the beginning of March through the end of November. We still maintain kind of the same schedule that we did back then, in that we typically have the Mars Series typically has 5 Summit Point races and then 4 races at other tracks. So 9 races a year as part of the Mars Series. This year is a little different. We only have 4 Summit Point races. Because our traditional early October date conflicts with the runoffs date.
Okay.
So we had to basically gift that weekend to our track days program, our high performance driving experience program for the year, so that we wouldn't lose the date in the overall schedule.
Right.
But yeah, so this year the Mars Series only has 8 races. It's really important to note that although I, as the program director for DC Region Road Racing, am the Mars administrator, we have a club racing committee that really, helps lay out all of the planning aspects of the series. That committee is made up of 10 drivers reps and 10 worker reps, so even numbers of drivers and workers. You mentioned earlier that Mike Collins was online in the chat, as was Greg Ginsberg. They have both, in the past, they both served as drivers representatives on that committee, including in my first stint as program director.
With Greg referring to him as a driver's representative is a very loose definition of driver representative.
I'm willing to bet that he could provide you with, documentation of his driving prowess. You can do a lot of things with, AI these days.
It's fun to be able to pick on Greg when he's not even here. So
yes. Exactly. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that, basically this committee, meets for basically 2 4-hour meetings in the off season where we kind of lay out the upcoming season in terms of, the race schedule, the weekend format, run groups and run group rotations. We have maintained at kind of that 8 race group format for the last probably 5 or 6 years. In my stint with the club, we have had as many as 10 race groups. That was primarily back in the mid 2000s when we were probably averaging close to 250 cars per event. And on our big Labor Day weekend, we would get over 300. We have not been immune to the some of the challenges that everyone has faced in road racing, with declining car counts, increasing costs. I would love to be able to run all 9 of our events, or even all 5 of our Mars events for the $100,000 that they did back in the mid 70s.
Yeah,
that's those days are gone. I think the fact that we've had an established program for so long, and drivers know that they're going to have a number of races that they can participate in, it really helps keep the numbers up. It's a lot harder to be in a region where you're only, can offer 1 race a year, because it's hard to build that customer base.
right.
If they don't have a consistent place to race. And so that's where we've been really fortunate, but history has been in our favor there, because we have been able to continue this program for so many years without interruption. Even during the 2020 COVID shutdown, we still managed a very limited program that year.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think the other thing that has really played into the success of the program in its current state are the success of some of our regional only classes. Our largest class right now, and for the past several years, has been our showroom spec Miata class.
Okay.
And this is a regional only class where we have a regional only rule set. It's the cars are limited to first generation 1.6 liter Miatas. They are all tuned, dynoed, and sealed, so that they're all should be making roughly the same spec. And it has just made some really competitive racing. And we average this year, we're averaging between 35 and 40 cars per Mars race.
Right.
For that group. We also, a few years ago, I think 2017 was the first year, maybe 18. Some of the folks in the region developed a class called, it's called our Sprint Bracket Road Racing class, but we abbreviate that as BIT, B-I-T.
Okay.
And it's Bracket IT, basically.
Okay.
In that the cars are, they must be prepared to IT safety specs. But other than that, you can pretty much run anything in the class. There are no tire rules. There are no engine rules. And essentially the racing is divided up. The timing and scoring is divided up into 7 brackets.
Okay.
So you're just racing with others in your bracket. So if you're out there with a very high horsepower car and you're in, an H production equivalent car, you don't have to worry about it because you're not racing them. You're racing others in your own time bracket. For this coming weekend, we have over 30 cars registered in that.
Wow.
And the other nice thing about it is we have some people who come just to race in that class, that run group, but it also is an opportunity for racers to go out and run a second race in the weekend if they're entered in another group. They can also come into the bracket group and get more track time, run another race. We do offer reduced entry fees for a second or third entry.
Right.
And one of the great things about the bracket program is if you run particularly fast and you run faster than your bracket, you don't get disqualified. You just get scored in the next higher bracket.
Oh, okay. That's kind of cool.
In essence, in concept, the bracket is kind of equivalent to, the current club racing experience, in that there are no specific limitations on what you can run. As long as it's not an open wheel car. The difference being that this group is still targeted at competition licensed drivers.
Right. I always thought a bracket race, an old school bracket race, would be fun, where you actually let cars off at the start of the race based on their qualifying time, and the Corvette will start last, and the Honda Civic will start first, and at the end, if all goes well, you should all be crossing the line at about the same time. I thought that would be a hoot of a race to run, especially if you could do like an hour or a 2-hour enduro. That would be really cool.
I think it would be more fun to watch the finish.
Yes,
As they
absolutely.
all cross the line in one big messy heap of broken metal.
That would be awesome. It never would work that way, where they would all get there at the same time, but it sure could be a lot of fun. So what are the current challenges today? Oh, one of the things I was going to say before we get to that, your regional only class, I find, and this is a whole nother podcast probably, but with all of the changes that have come to the club racing program, or that are coming to the club racing program, I think that the regional only classes, there's going to be more interest in those for some people in the next coming years, when if their class was completely eliminated like Formula 6 was, or if they just don't like the way the classes are being consolidated. I have a feeling that most regions are going to find a home for those folks and have them happily come and give their entry fees to a regional race and come play there. So I think the future of that is got some real potential there.
Hope you're right. I'm adopting somewhat of a wait and see attitude to see how that plays out. And I think the next few months, into the very beginning of next year, is going to tell us a lot in regard to racers' opinions of that and what options they choose to explore.
Right.
But we will certainly welcome them with open arms.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be what plays out over the next several years. Because I think people are going to some people be just cranky and not want to play for a while. Others may try it and find out it's not what they, wanted to do. And I don't think the full impact of where everyone's going to end up playing is going to be known probably for maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, once people experiment with what they've got and what everything is going to be. So, but I don't think that this new system is the demise of the regional racing program at all, like some people have thought. At least that's my hope. So Greg and Paul, what are the challenges you are facing today? Before I get to that question, I've got a whole train of thought. What are the 4 other racetracks that you guys do besides Summit Point?
Okay. Yeah, so it can vary from year to year,
okay.
But a couple things have remained constant over the last 2 decades. As Paul pointed out, we have always gone to VIR.
Okay.
Generally around the first week of May, for a dual regional there, which is the SARC Mars Challenge.
Yep.
So that has been very successful. That has always been a popular what we call them away races.
Right.
For our drivers to go to VIR. For the last few years as well, we have been in partnership with the South Jersey region. And we've been doing 2 races a year at NJMP, usually one on Lightning, one on Thunderbolt.
Right.
And then the 4th race this year, the Mars Series, included the Glen region's July-ish sprints at the Glen.
Okay.
And last weekend of June, that was a Mars stop this year as well.
Okay.
So those are the 4 races from this year. In the past, we've also included pit race on the schedule. As Paul noted, in the distant past, we have visited both Pocono and Nelson Ledges. But those are generally, we find if we stray too far away, our racers just don't want to travel that far.
I always have to remind myself that our acronym soup here, people don't always know who might be checking us from the outside. So NJMP is New Jersey Motorsports Park. And SARC is the South Atlantic Road Racing Championship. And I was a Road Atlanta guy when I was working at CNN and have done a lot of SARC races over the years, both as a worker and a participant. So those races are typically across the Southeast, Road Atlanta, VIR, Roebling Road, Daytona, Sebring. I think they might even hit Barber once in a while. But used to go to Memphis when there was a racetrack there. I did a driver's school at Memphis once. That's how old I am. But yeah, so yeah, lots of cool stuff in your area.
Indeed.
So you got a big one coming up. This is the Labor Day. It used to be called the Labor Day Double, but everything's a double these days. So do you still call it the Double?
We do not.
Okay.
And the main reason was we used to call it the Double because it was a dual sanction. It was double sanction. That was back in the day when SCCA required you to complete 2 race weekends to maintain your competition license.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Once it went to just a single race requirement, it just didn't really make sense to do it as a 2-sanction event.
Right.
So we no longer call it the Labor Day Double. Old timers still call it that, but we want to make sure they know it's not a true double sanction. It is just a single 3-day event. The difference between the 3-day event and our standard 2-day Mars is at this event, every group gets 2 qualifying or a morning qualifying session on Saturday. Then they have 2 feature races and 2 heat races and 2 feature races.
Okay.
To finish out the weekend. So they get 4 races.
So every series has its race, the Daytona 500, the Rolex 24, the Indy 500. Is the Labor Day Double kind of the Mars Series premier event?
Yeah, it is. It is because of that 3-day nature, and it kind of, and this year it's the end of the at least Summit Point season. We still have one Mars event at New Jersey Motorsports Park in October. That will actually close the Mars season. But this is the end of the DC region Summit Point season. And yeah, this 3-day weekend has always been the big event. When I started, we would get close to 350 cars.
Wow.
We don't get that anymore. No one does unless you're the June sprints.
Right.
But yeah, it's right now we're looking at 220 cars for this coming weekend.
Still impressive.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that turnout. The funny thing is, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we would get close to 350 cars, and we would somehow make them all fit in the Summit Point paddock, which is not a large paddock.
No, it is not.
And now I find myself wondering, how are we going to fit 220 cars in there this weekend?
Back in the day, people didn't all have haulers and motorhomes and transporters.
That's exactly the difference.
There were more cars that came to the racetrack on an open trailer behind a pick-em-up truck than or a minivan even than there were with the big haulers. Today, maybe there's a half a dozen people with an open trailer at the racetrack these days.
Yeah, that's exactly the difference.
Yeah, that's about right. It used to be when Group 44 pulled in with their tractor trailer.
Yep.
It was like, what are they doing here?
Exactly. Taylor Hyatt, who is a dear friend, reminds us that there's an awesome charity event at the Labor Day race as well, right?
Yes.
That's right. The Labor Day Mars event has always been our traditional charity weekend, where we raise money for a charity that we have selected. This year, as it has been the last couple of years, the charity is the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, and all the funds that we raise through our charity events will go to support their after-school programs.
Yep. Let me give a couple plugs here. We mentioned Taylor. Shirley Thompson is here. Steve Martin, J.D. King, Carl Johnson. Marshall Little says, great plug for the bit. Who else has shown up? CRX SI 1987. I don't know who that is. Mike Kelly is here. That's awesome. Scott Hank. I think I've mentioned everyone else. Thank you all for being here. Please hit the like button, subscribe. We would really appreciate that. We have a little announcement to make. I don't know how involved you guys are with the announcement I'm about to make. But before we get to that, anything we haven't talked about that we should tonight?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to say. I would just like to say that the people that we've had in the region who've supported the events and made them happy, like Greg, have been invaluable, as they are in most SCCA regions where there are no paid staff where everybody does it as a volunteer. And the amount of work that's put into some of these programs is incredible. Greg can tell you that. I don't know how many late nights he's had putting things together, but it's been more than a few.
Yeah.
I have a good team.
It's so important to have a good team. I mean, no matter what it is that we're trying to do, it's having. We don't come to the racetrack anymore. You know, Greg's been doing it since 2002, Paul since the 60s, me since the middle 80s. I've seen every race car almost that I ever want to see. I've driven a lot of them. We come back for the people, you know, and especially with a series like this where it's the same series for 47 years. I'm sure you're seeing the same people who are still around for decades, and I think that's a fantastic part of the story. That I'm sure we could be on here for another 4 hours just telling stories, but and maybe that'll be another podcast. But so I appreciate that. I want to thank all the people who helped put this together, and I don't have their names in front of me, and I will miss one even if I try. But there, like we said earlier, 47 emails to get to today, some video, some pictures, and this was a really fun show to do. The announcement I wanted to make is that Washington, D.C. region has agreed to have the Mars races and rebroadcast on the Racing Network, which is something I started here, and this is where people are watching the show tonight. We've got a whole bunch of several different podcasts. We have racing from Champ Car and Cal Club, and now Washington D.C. region's races are going to start to be restreamed here throughout our program wheel. And I am really, really excited to have you guys on board. And Greg and, like I said, Brian Donati, they do a great job putting those together. And it's just when I started the network, I was like, I got to get these guys on board. And your board of directors signed the paperwork, agreed to come on board. And I'm really looking forward to having the Washington D.C. races, the Mars series, on the Racing Network. So that's going to be very, very cool.
Agreed. I'm very happy to hear that, and I just want to give a shout out and give my thanks as well to Greg Ginsburg and Brian Donati for the job they do in broadcasting Washington D.C. region's races.
You know, all that work that Paul did back in the 70s with the public relations team, you know, it doesn't go away in this world that we're in, and the video streaming is kind of the calling card for what we do these days. And any region that has the opportunity to do that, it's where the youth are going to find us, and that is through social media and streaming. And it is, I think, it's really important to keeping the numbers up and getting new blood into what we do here, is to be able to have them be able to find us online in situations like that. So that's why one of the reasons why I'm doing this is to be able to get our messages, the amateur motorsports, enthusiast motorsports type series, give them a platform to be able to get their wares out there so people can find out what's going on and hopefully get involved. So that's the whole reason for the Racing Network, and we launched it 24 hours, 7 days a week, starting here about 2 months ago, and having a blast with it. So Greg, Paul, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to help put this together and to be part of the show tonight.
My pleasure.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you saw and you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the Racing Network on YouTube and the RacingWire Podcast Network on your favorite podcast platform. We have a new episode every Wednesday night on the YouTube, Friday mornings on the podcasts. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment on social media, especially if it's a good one. It is all Inside the SCCA and the Racing Network on Instagram, and on Twitter, it's RacingWire Info. A new episode every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.
I'm Dorsey Schrader, and when I'm on my way to a race, I'll listen to the SCCA podcast, Inside the Short Bus.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the RacingWire Podcast Network and Rural 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests, and not that of the SCCA.